Engaging story, where the fairy tale ends and real life begins.
And even though I definitely understand that chocolate cake is not equal to porn and chocolate cake is a whole filler.
Love stories with practical ways to strengthen your relationship.
We do a really good job, me in particular, about hiding these things and just kind of burying them and saying, well, if you don't talk about it, if you don't think about it, they don't really exist, but they still are there.
Strengthening your marriage, one story at a time.
People can look really good and put together and on the outside, and it doesn't mean that they don't need help or a mentor.
Now this is Engaging Story.
I'm Matt.
And this is Becca.
Today's episode features Craig and Jen Ferguson, and they are the authors of Pure Eyes, Clean Heart, A Couple's Journey to Freedom from Pornography.
Actually, I think Jen wrote the book.
But the book says Craig and Jen.
Oh, does it? Okay. So I read the book, and it was a really good book, especially because it hit home for me. Not as much for my marriage to Matt, but my first marriage ended because my ex-husband had a pornography addiction. And so I know that so many people in the church and without have addictions to pornography, and it's an area that's not always talked about, but is so important to talk about. So I wanted to have this couple on so they could tell their story and their journey, how they worked through dealing with the pornography addiction.
Because pornography is such a big issue in today's culture and society, we are excited to have Craig and Jen talk about this topic today in a transparent and honest way.
Unfortunately, the church hasn't done the best.
Our son agrees. Come on, church. Talk about porn better. After you get done listening to today's episode, please head on over to iTunes, leave a review, let us know what you love about our podcast and about this episode, and be sure to share it with a friend. If you'd like to connect with Craig and Jen after this episode and learn more about their ministry, you can head on over to engagingstory.com, and we've got it linked up there. You can check out their book, Pure Eyes, Clean Heart, and we're going to link you over to their website. It's called thenotproject.org. That's KNOT project.org. And let's get into the episode. We like to start each episode off with a song that was significant in the couple's journey and life. Today's song, B.B. King, Since I Met You.
The name of the song is Since I Met You, and basically is talking about how his whole life is now different and better now after he met her. I thought it was a very good summation of kind of how I felt about Jen, and that was the song we danced to at our wedding as well.
I lip-synced the female parts, and he lip-synced B.B. King parts, and it was very entertaining. But it definitely was very fitting for us because, when you get married, your whole life really does change. And in this song, it was all the positive changes. And so, when you first get married, you just think everything is going to be so perfect and rosy. And then, you hit the hard parts and you're like, oh, there was more to the song. They just didn't publish that part.
So tell us about how you met.
This is actually a humorous story because I had been going to the same church since I was 7. And at the time, I was a sophomore in college in San Antonio, and I had wanted to get a summer job working with our church youth program. And when I came home to Austin, and so the youth director was like, well, why don't you come and get to know the kids and come to the Good Friday lock-in? So I drove up from San Antonio. And my mom is the secretary at the church, and so I stopped by and said hi to her. Well, Craig's dad was the assistant priest at that time. It's an Episcopal church. And he came out when I was talking to my mom, and he said, my son's going to be there tonight at the lock-in, ha, ha, ha. And I was like, oh, great. And in my head, I was like, your son is bald. I just cannot date a bald guy. The assistant priest kids are never cute. Anyway, because I had seen him, maybe 2 years before. Mm-hmm. He was just really not attractive to me. Yeah. So, little did I know that he actually had his head shaved because his friend had been cutting his hair.
Thing was, the one time I hadn't gone to my normal barber, he was out of town, and I went to a discount place, and they really messed my hair up. And that was mistake number one. Mistake number two was going home and allowing my roommate to quote unquote fix it with a set of beard trimmers. And it just kept getting shorter and shorter and shorter until finally he was like, dude, I gotta take this whole thing off. I'm like, okay, go for it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, my head was buzzed.
Okay, so needless to say, I was not particularly thrilled about seeing Craig that night at the lock-in. But then I go back home, I pack my stuff, I drive back to the church, and I'm getting out of my car and walking into the church when I hear this pickup truck door slam. And so I turn my head, and there is Craig getting out of his car, no longer bald, with hair, and surprisingly very attractive. And so in my head at that moment, I was like, oh Lord, no. Like, no. I had just gotten out of not a great relationship a month before. I was finally like, okay, Jesus, it's you and me. I'm so good with this. And then here comes this guy, Craig, getting out of this blue pickup truck. And he totally it was that instant attraction. And so the whole night we're with the kids. We're like playing Bop It with them and talking. And the funny thing is the youth director had known me since I was a little kid. And she pulls Craig aside and says,
she asked me what my intentions were with Jennifer. And I said, well, I don't really know. I mean, I just met her. She said, well, just so you know, if you break your heart, I'll break your face.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and I believe this lady had the ability to do that.
Oh wow.
She's a tough cookie. Yeah, and so we definitely flirted that whole night back and forth. And the funny thing is that Craig looked older to me, and I couldn't figure out a nice way to ask him how old he was. And so I sat there racking my brain, how am I going to figure out if he's like age appropriate? I was like, oh, maybe I could ask him where he went to high school. So I was like, oh, where'd you go to high school? And he's like, Round Rock. And I was like, oh, really? I went to Westwood. So what year did you graduate? And he said, 93. And I was like, okay, I'm 96. We're good.
So how long were you dating before you got engaged? And tell us all about that.
The grand total of 11 days.
That's what I thought.
Wow.
Yep. And so, yeah, the really embarrassing part of the whole story is we were on our first date, and he was driving me back home, and he said, what are you thinking about? And it's just like the worst question you can ask a girl on a first date who is clearly head over heels, you know, I say in love, but you know, you don't really know that you love the person really because you don't know them all that well. And seriously, I still can't believe that I did this. I sat in the car, and at first I said, oh, nothing, you know, just whatever. And then he has the audacity to ask me again, so, Jen, no, tell me what you're thinking about. And I said, I think I love you.
Wow.
Who says that? I don't even know. I think I was, anyway. So then he says, well, the day that I tell you that I love you is the day that I know I want you to be my wife. And so I'm like mortified, right? Because I've completely worn my heart on my sleeve. So then, 11 days later, he had come back from his brother's nursing school graduation, and we're sitting on my couch, and he must have asked me again, what are you thinking about? And again, for the second time, I mortify myself and say, I just know that I love you. And he said, well, I love you too. And I was like, does that mean what I think it means? And he was like, yes. And he got down on a knee and he said, will you marry me?
Did you have a ring, Craig?
Oh, no.
No.
Okay.
Craig was very broke in these days. So that was May of 98. And then I didn't get my ring until December 99. And then we got married in June of 2000.
Okay.
So you dated, right, or engaged for 2 years.
Right.
And so how long was it till you started telling family and friends that you were engaged?
Our plan, I think, was to wait at least a month. But I kind of have a big mouth when it comes to, like, things like that. I just can't keep it inside. And so, I don't know, I think it was, like, maybe a month, if that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Because it was exciting. And the cool thing is that both people knew that we're very, like, rational, level-headed kind of people, and so they weren't too alarmed. And, you know, the fact that my mom worked at the church and his dad was a priest, I think they just thought, oh, they'll be fine. You know, they know Jesus. It'll be good. The crazy thing is I think that people thought that we were so put together and so we had a good relationship with Jesus that they just thought we didn't need help. And so that has really kind of changed our perspective on what we can do for other couples, because people can look really good and put together and on the outside, and it doesn't mean that they don't need help or a mentor. I think a lot of times when you realize you need a mentor is when you're in the really hard part. But if you have some people come alongside you before then, to be that safe place and sounding board, I think it can just save so much strife and heartache.
That's really good.
That's good.
And so you guys got married, and what were some of the surprises? Was marriage what you expected?
Well, I mean, that first year, we didn't see a whole lot of each other. She was still finishing school in San Antonio, so we lived in a place kind of in between San Antonio and Austin.
Yeah.
And so we would leave, both of us would have to be out of the house before 6, or we both would be late. And then we would get home after 6, and then it was dinner and maybe a movie, and then it was bed, and then rinse and repeat.
So the day we got back from our honeymoon and we came back and we had applied for life insurance before we left, and my insurance letter said, "You're great, you're accepted, no worries," and then his said, "We're denying you because of X, Y, and Z." And so that was a huge shock. I mean, I really thought, okay, he's gonna die. Like, in fact, I called the hospital and I was like, "We just got this letter, what should we do?" And poor nurse was just beside herself in what she could tell me. But so it was at that moment that we realized how differently we dealt with stress. Really sent Craig very internal, didn't want to talk about it, and that's kind of, I started thinking that maybe something was up with the pornography. I didn't have any smoking gun until the second year, but I definitely had my suspicions that he was looking at porn.
And while you were dating, that when it came up in a discussion, you asked about Craig about pornography, that if he'd used it before?
Right. And I was so naive, about porn. Like, I really did not understand anything about it being an addiction. And it was definitely, all guys look at it. But then I was like, but then he's going to get married and it's going to be fine. Because I really thought that porn was just about sex.
Right. So then what happened when it didn't stop?
I got really mad. I was like, why are you still doing this? I don't understand. So it definitely I was filled with shame. Like, clearly I'm not doing something right, because if I was, then he wouldn't be going outside our marriage for sexual fulfillment, still thinking it was about sex. And of course I had a bunch of self-image issues, and I just thought if he was finally caught, that would be enough motivation for him to stop. Because if I was caught, then I would be afraid of being caught again. But what's missing is that addiction piece, it's that compulsion. And I didn't understand that at all.
How about Craig? How were you dealing with this? How did you feel through the first couple of years?
Obviously, being caught, there is a sense of embarrassment and shame and guilt that goes along with that. And Jen's right. Like, I'm an internal processor, so whether it's stress related or something I need to really kind of wrap my mind around, I prefer to be by myself. I prefer to spend some time to really think about it and chew on it. And to Jennifer, that was a signal of being something very negative. Because of what she grew up with, silence was not a good thing in her household. Where with me, it was kind of a measure of comfort, where I could really because I didn't want to say something that wasn't reality, because I could very well be in the wrong. Right? And I wouldn't know that until I had a chance to really kind of replay it in my mind and really kind of think about it and process it. But as I was dealing with her anger and her hurt, really deep hurt, it kind of forced me to, in that first couple of years, to learn how to communicate with her. I still didn't really get it. It was much, much later in our marriage, but at the very beginning, it was a kind of a looking through the peephole of what Jennifer really needed in order to feel connected to me through how I communicated with her. So that was the start, like I said, the start of that lesson, but I didn't learn it till much, much later.
Yeah, but I feel like his porn addiction, not just the porn, but the whole health issue, we realized, we communicate really differently. We have very different processing styles. We have very different views on what silence means or what a real authentic conversation means. And so we were really on the opposite sides of the spectrum on a lot of like key important things, and had to learn how to meet in the middle.
So tell us the story, I guess, Jen, about you just had the baby, right? And you were at home, and then you woke up, I think, and then you found Craig on the computer.
Yeah, so that was, after the initial, I can't believe that you're doing this. And he had said, I will stop. I promise I will stop. And so I just took him at his word, right? Because I thought he would be motivated by not wanting to be caught again. But then, we had just had our first baby. She was 4 months old. He had gotten up with her to give her a bottle. And then I got up later and found him in the study. And that was just like, my world was just rocked. I was like, I don't, obviously you're not motivated to change because of fear. So what is there? Like, what do we do with this? Because obviously it's still a problem. And that was really when I realized this was more than just looking at pictures on the internet. It must signify something greater, because that was the time that he became suicidal. And so I kind of stuffed everything at that point, because I felt like I need to keep my husband alive. Like, I need to give him hope that I'm not going to leave, that I'm with him in this, that, I didn't want a divorce or anything like that. And so it really just became about letting him know that I was really there. And so that's when he did call his dad, because I called his dad because I didn't know what to do with a suicidal husband. And so I called his dad, and Craig talked to him, and they decided he would get into counseling. So that was probably the first proactive step that we took, because we realized that this was not something that he could really kick on his own.
And then you got a book, right? Every Man's Battle Book with a workbook. Was that helpful?
Initially, yes. Because, I think it does a really good job of giving you some tactical ideas and kind of walking you through some of the mechanical and kind of process that's related to the addiction that's shared with other addictions too, not just pornography. It could be alcohol, it could be drugs or whatever. But it didn't work, and it's kind of like with counseling. With counseling, I just turned it into a conversation and was very good at kind of navigating around. And my therapist wasn't probably the best. It definitely wasn't the right one for me at that time, because I needed someone to hold me accountable, someone to kind of put their thumb down on me and say, no, we're really going to talk about this, and that wasn't him.
Well, and he also wasn't a specialist in sex addictions. Yeah. And so if you're going to counseling for sexual addictions, including pornography addiction, it's really beneficial, I think, to see someone who is specially licensed, certified to treat sexual addictions. And he wasn't that. No. But I remember, Craig would come home from counseling, and I'd be like, so how'd it go? What did you talk about? And he would be like, oh, we ended up talking about this historical blah, blah, blah. And I just remember putting my head in my hand thinking, oh my gosh, like, what is happening here? And so I realized, Craig is really good about hiding his true feelings. Like, he really can talk about nothing or get people sidetracked, because he's such a easygoing, jovial, social chameleon kind of thing. He's really good at avoiding the hard stuff if he wants to. So, it was like, but what do you do? I had already spent so much time trying to control the whole situation. We set up our own rules and regulations that he was supposed to follow in order to, not be tempted or whatever, and it wasn't working. And so when I caught him again, that was a Mother's Day, I come home. So now we had 2 kids. Hannah was 6 months old, and Abby was 2. I had gone to get a haircut, and I ended up coming back early because the salon was closed, and he was in his study again. And that's when I was like, okay, Jesus, like, I cannot do this anymore. Counseling didn't work, our rules and regulations didn't work, and I'm like, what else do I do? Is this really the life that I'm going to live for the rest of my life? And I was really mad at God. And he just interrupted me. He let me finish. And he just said, do you want to try this my way? And I was like, well, I don't see another one, so sure. And that's when I really, really had to turn things over to God.
So how did that look versus your way of controlling everything and checking the history and scolding him for failing? Like, what was it like once you put it into God's hands?
I think for me, I came to the point where I realized how exhausting the whole thing was and how parenting Craig was not fruitful. And so I really tried to let it go. So I said, okay, Lord, if I need to know if he's looking at porn, then I'm going to trust that you're going to wake me up in the middle of the night. And he did that twice, actually. So I'm super grateful, that God came through with his word. So I stopped checking the history, and I went to bed when I was tired instead of, making sure that he came to bed with me. And I prayed a lot. Beth Moore has a book called Praying God's Word, and it's filled with scriptures that you can use to pray against different strongholds. And there's one about sexual addiction stronghold. And so I would pray scripture over him every day. I think what was really awesome is that God kind of taught me how to have conversations with Craig where we could start to get to the root of what was really causing the addiction. And so once I realized that this was really driven by a fear of rejection and a fear of not measuring up, not thinking that he had what it takes, then I was able to really use his love language at the time, which was words of affirmation, to our advantage, and to really speak life into him and to praise him and to let him know that I was for him. And as God started changing the dynamics of our relationship, and so even though Craig turning to porn wasn't about our relationship, God was so faithful to enhance and change and, just make our relationship better, that Craig had more motivation to really seek God. Because Craig had to come to the realization later. I mean, it took him several years after the Mother's Day thing to realize that he couldn't do this on his own. So for me, I had to sit back and wait until Craig was ready to trust God and say, okay, you know what? I'm not able to do this on my own willpower. I need you to help me with this. And that was really, the defining time when there was real long-lasting change, is when I could step back and that allowed Craig to pursue Jesus in that.
And Craig, could you tell a difference in Jen right away when she started praying and reading the Beth Moore book, that there was a different way of how she approached you and the situation?
The greatest example of when it really hit me was when I confessed to Jennifer that I had seen it, that I had been engaging in pornography, and she didn't freak out. I could tell she was upset, but hurt, but the way she responded to it was really one of love and compassion, and really kind of where I could tell she was fighting, but she was fighting the enemy and not me.
Right, because I had by that point recognized that this wasn't about me. Like this, and God was so faithful and to show me how his porn addiction really paralleled my food addiction, because I definitely had an unhealthy relationship with food for a long time. And God had shown me that I was using food to fill a void that only he was supposed to fill. And so when God showed me the parallel between my food addiction and his porn addiction, it just made me realize, okay, he took the easy way out. Like, that's what he did. He chose to eat the chocolate cake. And even though I definitely understand that chocolate cake is not equal to porn, but at the bare bones, porn and chocolate cake is a whole filler. And so if we are filling our lives with external, tangible things to give us joy and peace or affirmation or release or whatever, and we're not choosing Jesus, we're setting ourselves up for even more failure. And so God in that moment was just like, he chose the wrong thing. And so I was like, well, I can really understand that. And so being able to separate myself or subtract myself out of the addiction equation was so helpful.
Page 32, it talks about, if you're going to lead my wife and kids, I must allow myself to be led by God. It's not that I'm going to be sinless or never make a mistake, but I want to cultivate the desire to be pure and to live according to God's will, not my own cravings.
Right.
I think it was, so it's like not this striving thing, I'm going to be perfect anymore, but that I put my expectation of God that you can handle it and you're going to help me and I want to lead and show up. I'll show up this far. You, God, meet me halfway.
Yeah, totally.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us more about the book and kind of who is it for and what even inspired you writing it? When did you get to a point that you guys decided you wanted to write a book about this?
The book is called Pure Eyes, Clean Heart, A Couple's Journey to Freedom from Pornography. And we take turns alternating chapters. So Craig writes, there's 6 parts to the book, and there's 3 chapters in each part. So Craig writes the first part, I write the second part, and then we have third chapter in every part is for the couple that's reading this book. It gives them scriptural research and secular research about pornography and how they can, it's kind of just parallels our steps to freedom. And it's not steps, just our story, really. Because with porn addiction, with any addiction, there's not a one-size-fits-all cure except for Jesus. But right, so it's like a chandelier, and there's all these different things that you can do, all these different tools in this world that you can use to help you with your addiction. But if Jesus isn't the electricity that's going to that light bulb, it's that thing is not necessarily going to work for you. And just like counseling did not work for Craig in the counselor that he had, but it wasn't beneficial. Really, it was the cathartic writing of this book that got him to those deep places of hurt and pain and childhood wounds that had festered, and he just reached out to porn in order to kind of put a Band-Aid over those things. And so when he, like counseling, good counseling, they get to the root of those things. And God was just really able to get to the root of Craig's wounds through this writing process. And so,
well, and part of the writing process too is you and I talking about it as we're writing.
Yeah.
So that was, it wasn't just writing it, it was the conversations that we had as we were writing.
Right. And so really, I truly believe, we both believe that God, through the obedience in writing this book, is that God really gave Craig the gift of freedom.
Was some of it really hard going back to those subjects and learning more about it, or did you feel like a sense of healing and freedom, or both?
It was so hard. I remember at one point I was writing a chapter, and I'm a deadline-driven kind of girl, and I had set this goal for myself, and I was like, I'm going to finish this chapter, and I was reliving these memories, and all I could do was sit there and cry. And God said, you're done for the day. Like, your job today is to just grieve this out. And because if I grieve it out, then God can heal that, and it's not festering inside of me anymore.
Well, yeah, going back and revisiting memories and revisiting experiences and conversations that I had or people that I had met or encountered, and then sharing that with Jennifer and having her listen and then provide her feedback and her thoughts. Yeah, there were some really hard conversations that came out of that, but at the same time, and Jennifer was hinting at it there as well, is that as you do this process initially is painful, but that's what allows the healing to kind of come in. Is, you know, we do a really good job at, me in particular, about hiding these things and just kind of burying them and saying, well, if you don't talk about it, if you don't think about it, they don't really exist, but they still are there. So it's only when you allow them to be surfaced and really processed through that God can come in. I mean, he's a lover, right? And he is not going to force himself on us. He wants to be invited, and that requires you to open up and allow him in. And that's very dangerous at times, and it's very scary at other times. But at the end of that experience is where the healing and the relationship is.
That's kind of like you can imagine being the prodigal son and seeing your dad a long way off, ready to receive you with open arms. And I tell women all the time, and I tell men too, if you confess, if you open your mouth and you speak out the sin and confess, it's always better than keeping it in the dark, because when the words are out, they're exposed to light, and who is light? Jesus. So that's part of that invitation to asking Jesus in, is that confession to your spouse, to God, to people, people around you that are your supportive tribe.
For sure. This was well needed. I do want to thank you both for definitely being vulnerable and opening up and writing this beautiful book.
Thank you.
I haven't seen anything quite like that. So it's with Christ as the center, but also just so real, showing all the day-to-day hard things that you went through, but with God we're able to overcome and even create a stronger, better marriage, and now a whole ministry and around it.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. It was worth it. I mean, we said even if it didn't get picked up by a publishing house, that we would still finish writing it because it was so beneficial for our marriage.
Mm-hmm.
So as much as this is for the world, it was for us.
Okay, so tell us more about the Not Project.
The tagline is tied by God and tangled from the world. And because the truth is that porn is definitely something that tries to disrupt our union that God tied together that wedding day. And we can get tangled up in porn, we can get tangled up in success, in our jobs, in our kids, and all of these things that can be good things, right? Our job is a good thing. Our kids are good things. Our church and ministry are good things. But when they start tugging on the union, the marriage relationship, then everything starts unraveling. And so we really just want to call attention to why your marriage is top priority. Under your relationship with God, boom, there your marriage is. And how do we resist all of these pulls from the world and stay unified like God has called us and created us to be unified? And so, a lot of times churches would love, in theory, to probably have us come and talk about porn, but who's going to walk in the door when it's a conference about porn? Because there's so much shame around it still. It's not a mad rush for ticket sales. And so we just wanted a broader way to speak into marriages and then be able to tackle the topic of pornography well.
You asked the question earlier, who was your mentor? And we said we didn't really have one. And now that we've been married 16 years, going on 17 years, we can be that mentor for other people. And I feel it's something that's really important to both of us, and we want to be able to give back.
Yeah.
Thank you, Craig and Jen, for sharing so honestly and transparently about such a tough topic.
Yeah, I loved how Jen spoke about how she felt betrayed every time that her husband, Craig, looked at pornography. And I know as a woman, that's often how you feel, that looking at a woman over a computer screen can feel the exact same way as finding him in an adulterous affair, that we are pretty sensitive and it hurts. Wow, what a tough lady to pray for her husband to not give up on the marriage, that instead of becoming bitter and angry and giving up, that she took it to God, and instead of yelling at him, that she went into prayer, and that she prayed and she fought for her marriage, that she let the Holy Spirit work in him. And as she set up a safe place in the home and let him come to her whenever he was tempted and tell her about it, or whenever he failed, that he felt comfortable enough they could be accountable together on that, and he no longer felt like she was just being judgmental or mean. And so that was the beginning of their healing, as he had an accountability partner and he was able to overcome his pornography addiction.
Well, and turn it into a ministry. It's so cool to see that what was the darkest, toughest time in their relationship is now being used to help so many couples. They even talked about having a Bible study in their home, going through the study guide for their book, and being able to use their story to encourage and give hope to other couples going through a unfortunately common issue.
Yes, helping other couples that were battling pornography addiction.
We know this episode will resonate with many couples as the issue of pornography is so prevalent in our society. This is valuable information, and we really hope you pass it on, share it with a friend. And if you want to learn more about Craig and Jen's book, Pure Eyes, Clean Heart, check out our website. We've got it linked up there, engagingstory.com. And you can learn more about Craig and Jen's ministry at notproject.org. That's KNOT project.org, or just check it out at our website, again, as we'll link it up there, engagingstory.com. And again, leave a review on iTunes and tell us what you think of the podcast.